One of the most amazing things on our planet is water. Remember where it comes from? That's right. Scientists currently think that water probably comes originally from comets. Anyway, the story that I'm about to tell you features these wonderful characters. The water droplet and the water molecule. I'm going to call them Mrs. Droplet, Miss H2O. Water droplets are made of many of these water molecules all bound together. So we all know the story of water. One hot and sunny day, Mrs. Droplet was merrily flowing down the river. She flowed through a stream and eventually she found her way to the sea. Once in the sea, she was happily floating around. However, she became a little confused as many of her friends had disappeared and kept disappearing from around her. But, being the calm and collected droplet that she was, she just kept on flowing until, dun dun dun, suddenly she realised that she was becoming rather warm. The sun was beating down on her, and as she became warmer and warmer, suddenly she started to evaporate. The Miss H2Os, that's the water molecules, all made their way up into the sky. Molecule by molecule, the water, now Miss H2O, rose up into the sky. She evaporated from Mrs. Droplet into the sky. Many Miss H2Os floated about, drifting around in the atmosphere. Water molecules are sticky critters. They like to be together. So when enough water molecules huddled together, poof, they became a cloud. The cloud was transported across the sky, and as more and more water molecules entered the huddle in the cloud, the molecules began to condense. As the molecules condense and are transported across the sky, droplets begin to fall onto the mountains. This is called precipitation. It could be snow or it could be rain. Mrs. Droplet lands on the mountain. She flows through the river, through the stream. She might end up in the sea, and the whole process begins again. She wonders where her friend droplets are. She becomes warm. Miss H2O begins to evaporate up into the atmosphere. Lots of Miss H2Os become huddled in a cloud because water is really sticky. The water molecules are sticky. That is transported across the sky. Condensation occurs. Water droplet, Mrs. Droplet, falls from the clouds, runs down the mountain, down the river, into the sea, etc. So, really simple, right? Wrong. That is accurate-ish. It's not the whole story of what happens to water. So, listen up, get ready, let's go. So here is our land, the land that we can see. Here's what's underneath what we can see. Here we have soil, we have rocks, we have some sand, the roots of trees and flowers. What about underneath that? Here we have what we call the saturated zone. In this zone, something called groundwater fills spaces between soil particles and fractured rock beneath the Earth's surface. So, what's underneath this layer? Beneath this layer, there is an impermeable. That means the water cannot travel through this material. However, there are some channels that allow the water to travel through. So the water cannot move through the material itself, but there are some cracks in the material, some tunnels that allow movement of the water in the saturation zone here to move into the deeper layer. There may be several layers built up like this before you get to bedrock. You then, as we know, have the tectonic plates, and beneath that we have the magma chamber, molten rock and magma. As I said, this layering here may be repeated several times before you get to the tectonic plates. So I notice that here, this saturation zone finishes at around the same point as this lake essentially begins above ground. That's because the water from this saturation zone can move through the earth, the layer of earth that is here. And this is not always the same. It depends on the geography of the area. So there may be some impermeable, that means that the water can't move through it, materials that line the lake bed, or it might be permeable. If it's impermeable, it's possible to have a water source that isn't sat within the saturated zone. So as I said, the water can move in and out through what is essentially the wall of the lake. It depends where the pressure is greatest. So if the lake is lower than the water table, which is the top of the saturation zone here, then the water would move through into the lake, because the pressure, the amount of weight essentially build up here would be too great, and it would force its way through the banks. If the lake was to be higher than the water table, top of the saturated zone, just like a bath, the water wants to be level, then the water would move through the earth and travel down. Water wants to travel down due to gravity into the saturation zone. Let's have another look at our water cycle. Miss H2Os condensate within the cloud, forming water droplets. The water droplets might fall onto the tree, might fall onto the ground, they may fall onto a mountain or a hill, into a lake, or even into the sea. If Mrs. Water Droplet were to fall onto the ground over here, she may move through the ground and be taken up by the roots of the tree, or the roots of the grass, roots of flowers, or Mrs. Water Droplet may continue to move through the surface of the earth and enter the saturation zone, becoming part of the groundwater. If Mrs. Water Droplet fell into a river, she will join the river stream, going down towards either a lake, the sea. From this river, it's possible for water to move in towards the saturation zone, becoming groundwater. If Mrs. Water Droplet falls onto a mountain, she may run off the mountain, joining a river or a stream. She may move through the mountain towards the saturation zone, becoming groundwater. She may move slightly sideways and leave through the side of the mountain, joining a river or a stream. Where the water moves into the earth like this and moves through towards the saturation zone, we call this infiltration. What do we call it? infiltration. The water moving through the ground, being drawn by gravity towards the centre of the earth. If the water here was drawn into the roots of the tree or the roots of the grass, as the trees photosynthesize, water can be released back into the atmosphere. We call this transpiration. And after that, Mrs. Water Droplet's cycle goes on.